for the, there it is, recording in progress. All right, thank you. So hi everyone, I'm Ashton Johnston. I made a one slider for y'all to peruse while I talk today. Um, Apologies, the slides are not, probably the best slides I've ever made, but hopefully they get the point across, and I'll try and talk for maybe 15 minutes-ish. Hopefully don't want to go too much longer than that, but feel free, type questions into the chat, or if possible, come off mute. Feel free to ask questions as we go. And yeah, I'll just go and get started. So, name's Ashton Johnston again. I've spent 7 years at Johns Hopkins University Applied Physics Lab. It's kind of a long name, so we just call it APL. We refer to ourselves as APLers. I'm an assistant program manager there for the Emerging Concepts program. I'll get into a little bit of what that means later. On the left side of kind of, one slide to sort of summarize some highlights from my career and my education. On the right side is more specific to Johns Hopkins. So you can see I have my bachelor's in electrical engineering from UNCC, of course, great alma mater. Master's in electrical and computer engineering from Johns Hopkins. I got that part-time while I was working at the lab. Did my thesis in underwater vehicle control, modeling and simulation, stuff like that. Um, Before I became an engineer, I did a number of things. I had a number of past lives, and I'll get into why this is important on a future slide, but kind of touch on the fact that I wasn't just, in school and doing engineering. Prior to going back to school for engineering, I was worked as a contractor in the Charlotte area for about 10 years. Land hardscaping, carpentry, drywall, electrical, flooring, kind of you name it. So if the structure's up and the breaker box is in, I can do it, right? So that's how I started, and didn't really get into engineering until mid-20s. I'll kind of talk through, the lessons that that's taught me, and maybe some helpful lessons for you all. I'm also a musician. I was a music instructor before becoming an engineer. I taught voice and taught saxophone and a few other things. And I also worked at Northrop Grumman for a little bit. They have a facility in the Charlotte area called Synoptics that grows crystals for laser applications. So if you know anything about like solid state lasers, they need a crystal in there to function properly, and they grow those types of crystals at that facility. So I worked there first as an intern and then as a staff engineer for about a year before I applied to and got the job at APL. So at APL, I've done a number of things, as you can see. I listed off all my past roles and experiences just to fill out the slide, honestly, but it kind of gave me a chance to think through all the various things I have done at APL. So from top to bottom is maybe in order, the sequence order from like oldest to newest, where the newest being the assistant program manager for the last 2-ish years now. I've been doing that role. Um, I'll kind of just for brevity skip to some of the more important ones. Like there's various sort of outside of direct funded work things to do at APL. So there's IRADs, internal research and development. Most larger companies also have some sort of IRAD program where you can propose for internal funds to do your own research. So they have a very robust program at APL. I've gotten IRADs 4 years now out of my 7, either as a technical SME or as a project lead or whatever role I played. But it's a really interesting way to sort of flex your skills as well as like learn some new things and have it paid for by work, which is great. I'll skip over Blast. Although that is something I can maybe speak to if people are curious. That was like a counter drone thing, but it was all unclassified, so I can speak to that if anyone's curious. The next 3 bullets going from bottom to top, embedded systems, modeling and sim, controls engineer, that's basically like my technical work and what I do as a engineer at the lab, but now more in the managerial roles. But I still flex back into those technical roles depending on what the project needs. I've been an intern manager, lead, LEAD there, that 3rd bullet from the bottom, from the top rather. That's leadership, education, and training, leadership, education, and development. There it is. So that was like a leadership program at APL that I helped sort of found and co-lead, sort of expediting the training for new hires and early career staff within the lab. And then this is sort of where rubber hits the road, section supervisor, project manager. So for about 4 years, I was just an engineer, didn't have any other roles or responsibilities. I became a section supervisor around the time I became a project manager as well, sort of took out that next step of responsibility. And the difference between the two at the lab's broken into sectors, and then each sector is broken into branches. Each branch is broken into a group, and then each group is broken into a section. And I was just the supervisor for one small section in a larger group of about 100 people. But it's more of a people management rather than project management, right? I'm not worried about cost, performance, schedule. I'm making sure that people are happy in their jobs, right? As a section supervisor, and if they have any issues, I'm their first point of contact before they go to a group supervisor or someone else. So I really enjoyed that role. I did that for about 2 years, and then my current position kind of precludes me from having the time to do that. I was also a project manager, still kind of am, but sort of at a higher level, if you will. Um, and I, won't go into what project management is. I think most people know what that is: cost, performance, schedule, right? Keep everything on schedule, on cost, and deliver the thing you said you would deliver. So I am curious if people can come off mute, if there's a good answer to this question. If anyone can explain to me what you think the difference is between program management and project management, because I think that's a confusing differentiation sometimes. So I'm curious if people have any thoughts there, like what that might mean.
And I did make it so they all can talk if they wish to, but if you have issues being able to get your stuff going on, let me know.
All right, none heard. So in my line of work, after a few seconds, you just keep moving because everything's digital nowadays.
It
So
looks
the
like
diff
they'll type. Connor says he'll type
Okay.
something.
Okay,
So
typing
you can
something
keep
in.
going.
Awesome. Yeah, yeah. Well, I'll come back to it, right? So I'll jump to the pictures on the right while we wait for that answer, and then I'll kind of explain it so y'all have a sense of what I actually do for my job as well. So I'm kind of curious how close Connor gets. So the picture on the bottom right there, that's me on the far right in the Carhartt jacket because I'm from North Carolina and you got to represent, right? But the other two guys, they're actually close friends of mine. We still work together at the lab. Guy on the far left actually just had a second kid, even though he's like 22 in that picture. So point being is this is several years ago on a project. I was just, an engineer on a team. So maybe 5 or 6 of us. This is actually up in New York, upstate New York in December, I believe. So hence the snow. And so the squall blew in off the lakes and, we were down for the day. We weren't able to do any testing. So this is on like a field test for a system I'd helped develop. And then the picture above that was actually taken earlier this year, I think February timeframe, March timeframe in North Carolina on the coast. I'm in there somewhere on the far right, but this is just a larger team that I'm actually leading currently. And this is only a small, maybe 10% of the overall team. This is about 30 people. So, a large group across the entire continental United States of about 200 people that I'm helping, lead this program as it moves forward. And this is the group that came out to test that week. About 30 people all told to, operate the system, collect data on the system, as well as just sort of assess and analyze how things were going. So, the progression of my career, is kind of symbolized in those two photos from just being a Joe on a job working, one small piece of a single system to being a guy in charge of hundreds of millions of dollars, hundreds of staff, and having to make it all come together for the government. So let's see what Connor came up with. Project management is large scale compared to the software management. Software focusing on the piece of software that fits within the project. Maybe. Okay. Close, right? And I'll extend that to include the program side. So for instance, you mentioned software, you might have a software lead, right, on a project. That software lead probably reports to a project manager, right, who's looking at the cost of that software lead and his team or their team, the schedule that software lead is working on, and the software lead has to keep that updated, as well as whether they're actually producing anything, the performance, right? Cost, schedule, performance, CSP, always for project management. Program management is that step above, right? So program managers aren't just looking at a single project, they're looking at multiple projects, right? And there's different ways that this can come about. It might just be a very, very complicated project. For instance, the project that I'm running right now you can call it a single project, but there are 10 or 12 project managers that report to me, right? Because they each have their individual projects within that broader program to make this overall system come together. There's a safety lead, there's a mechanical lead, there's a software lead. There's actually two software leads for two different types of software, right? There's a comms lead, you name it, right? So all these various leads are actually project managers in their own right for their own team at their own facility because they may work for a vendor, they may work for a lab, they may work for a naval facility, but they're project managers in their own right. And me as a program manager at my level, I oversee all of that. And mostly what that means is I'm more focused on those CSP things, cost, schedule, performance, um, but also focused on interactions between the various facets of the project or program, as well as contracts. right? Things that, project managers hopefully don't have to deal with too much, depending on the type of project manager they are. But like contracts and funding and actually making sure money gets to people to make sure the work continues. It's a big part of the job. And my specific role, since I'm working on a government program, and I'm not a government employee, right? I work for Johns Hopkins. So I'm a contractor to the government. My specific role, because I'm not allowed to do certain things as a non-government employee, is more as a technical subject matter expert or a technical advisor to the government employees who are in the leadership positions for this program. So, as a program manager at APL, what I might do is oversee various projects, and those projects could be related, they could not be related, but my job at APL is to manage cost, schedule, and performance of those projects, right? Working with the project manager. So it's just a step above project management. It's the ultimate, middle management tier, if you will. Like, the world will not end if program managers don't exist, as I'm sure many tech companies are finding out as they try and replace this with AI. But point being is, it's just that interface layer where you're above project management, you're focused on more than just one thing, which is very complicated sometimes. All right, so last thing on the slide I'll touch on before I dive into the rest of it is the best career advice I ever received. I randomly put this on a slide once for some reason, and I repurposed that slide for this presentation. I kind of liked leaving it in there. So don't complain and don't blame others. Even if an issue is not your fault, take responsibility and get the job done. I think that's the best advice I've ever received, full stop, for anything, not just for my professional life. Other than like, learn to code, right? But great advice. No one wants to work with someone who just complains and blames others, even if they're getting their job done. And you're just wasting time if you're blaming someone and or complaining about the job, right? Just put your head down, get it done. And honestly, it's going to serve you better than the small amount of dopamine you might get from complaining about the situation you've been handed, right? And I think that single, two sentences of advice has served me extremely well these last 7 years as I've worked my way, to my position at APL. All right, so I'm going to jump to the next slide here. When I was talking to Linda, when I was putting this together, Miss Thurman, I wasn't sure what all to talk about, and she mentioned maybe just like talk through a day in the life. Well, every day for me is a little different, so maybe just a week in the life. And for those who aren't aware, I live in the DC area, so I wanted to make a map here. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but I live right around here. This is the border for DC. It's roughly diamond shaped. And APL is up here between Baltimore and DC, right on that like 95 corridor that connects the two cities. If you've never been up here, that's what it looks like. Um, APL's up here. That's where I technically work. But as I mentioned, and I'll maybe elaborate on as we go, I'm actually working on a Navy program. So Navy offices are down at the Washington Navy Yard, which was the original naval base for the United States Navy, which just turned 250 years old this year, by the way. And that is in the heart of DC, right on the, I think that's the Anacostia on that side, if I remember correctly. And so I used to drive up to APL every day, and that's about 20 minutes. It's not too bad. And the reason I made this slide with the map is so I could layer on the traffic, because a lot of my life and a week in my life revolves around avoiding traffic. If you notice, I have to drive through DC, right through the heart of it every day to get to the Navy Yard. And then Pentagon's like over here, airport's here, kind of thing, right? So like a lot of my life is down here, basically living in DC, working in DC. I technically live just outside of DC in Silver Spring, but beside the point. And I find it interesting that this commute through DC takes me twice as long as this commute, which is twice as long by distance up to APL because, just the way the traffic works. So a week in my life, I wake up very early. I tend to get up around 5, 6 a.m. Again, I spend a lot of my time avoiding traffic, if you can believe it. Um, so I get up by 5 or 6. I'm trying to get to work and start work by 7 a.m. So I took a little snapshot of my calendar here. This is, I didn't put the times, but where these boxes end is roughly 10 a.m. So I try and start work around 7:30. And the reason for that is that gives me a few hours prior to all of the meetings that is basically my life, 5 days a week. So I purposely put a hold on my calendar for the first few hours every day, to make it harder for people to put meetings on my calendar between 8 and 10. And then I also take that time to do what I call deep work, or others also call it deep work, of if I need a presentation put together, if I have to review a document, I need time to actually sit down and read it that's the time that I carve out during my day to make sure I get it done. And funny enough, I actually started doing this while I was in my in school at UNCC, my undergrad years. So I purposely got to school hours before my first class so I could get everything done, not just last minute homework, because that definitely happened too, but also like study for tests, whatever it might be, right? So it's a good habit, maybe a good lesson. One interesting thing when I was looking for like what week to take a snapshot of, I chose this one because when you get to a certain level, other people start putting their travel on your calendar. So you can track when your team is out of town. And so your calendar becomes this really pivotal thing in your professional life, especially at my level, where I live and die by my calendar. If it's not on my calendar, I don't know what's happening. If it doesn't go in my notebook, which I don't have right in front of me, if it doesn't go in my notebook that I would normally have right with me, it doesn't happen, right? So like these calendars and things become the tools that make your life like possible, for you to function in a really complicated life like this one. Another thing that happens at my level is a bunch of like long meetings. So this is like a looks like a CDR at some point. You know, a few other things in here. I purposely sort of obfuscated it. It's also like 2 years old, so none of this is stuff that I'm still doing. But you end up with these long technical reviews and whatnot, and there's like whole days that you get blocked off where you're not getting actual work done, right? And then all the white space in this calendar when I'm not in meetings or calls or something is mostly email. So that's my life, right? It's all talking to people. It's all communicating with people. Some of it currently at my level, it used to be 40 hours a week. I was doing math or coding, whatever, right? Engineering work. Some of my life now is still that. 99% of it is actually non-engineering work, communications, writing, psychology, right? Understanding why people are thinking what they're thinking and how to maybe not manipulate them in a bad way, but to use that word, manipulate them into thinking the way you need them to think, right? That's a lot of my job. And those, frankly, aren't skills that they teach you in engineering school, right? But I want to get into maybe how I learn those skills, how you can learn those skills, and then also kind of talk about, just good life lessons for maybe your first 5 years out in the real world. So, um, before I move on, any quick questions or anything? And I'm happy to answer questions at the end as well, but just like to give students an opportunity to ask as we go.
And you're more than welcome to verbally say it, like unmute yourselves or type them in the box if you all want to.
And in case anyone's typing, I'll monologue a bit more. Apologies. One thing that's not captured on this slide is the amount of travel. So for my job in particular, I travel quite a lot. I actually went back and looked in the last year. I've taken 15 trips for work that required a flight, and I've probably taken 15 more that were just driving, but I still like stayed in a hotel or something, or it was a down and up again. I was driving for a few hours, had some meetings, had to drive back, and that ate up the whole day, right? But that was a trip. So I travel quite a lot. Um, West Coast, East Coast, even the Gulf Coast down in the South. I mentioned traveling to New York. I've been to Hawaii for work. I've been to 49 states now as of this year, partially for work, partially for travel, just for fun. And the last state's Alaska, and I'm like fingers crossed, work pays for that one too. But yeah, so I travel quite a lot. Part of that is for going to test locations. Sometimes you need a certain environment to test your system, whatever that system may be. And so you have to travel to that environment to test it. You can't do everything in modeling and sim. Part of it's traveling for meetings. Sometimes you have to go to where the command is, whatever command you're working for, potentially, right? So Navy has a variety of commands. If anyone on the call is like served, you may understand some of that structure, but sometimes you have to travel to them, right? You can't always do a call. So there's a lot of reasons why travel happens. And then the DMV area, the DC, Maryland, Virginia area where I live, there's a lot of local travel. I've been to the Pentagon several times, right? Like it sounds cool, but it's really just a big office building, and it's really stressful to get there and to find anything in there. But sometimes that turns into a whole day affair where you're walking around trying to find something in DC of all places. So one question. What is the best way to learn these skills? And if you're introverted, how could you get out of that shell? Okay, so as far as communications and talking with people, practice, 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 practice. That's the only way. There are definitely like webinars like this one or TED Talks, I'm sure, or whatever they are, that can speak at you about how to develop skills to talk to people. The only way to really practice talking to people is to talk to people. And if you're an introvert, my recommendation is not baptism by fire. Don't go join like whatever the toast test, whatever they're. It's like a club.
Toastmasters.
Thank you, Toastmasters. Thank you. You can tell I'm not a member. Um, don't go join Toastmasters your first day if you're really introverted and you're really shy, you're not sure what's going to happen. You might get blown out of the water, right? It might just be a bit too much for you. Join a small club at school. Five, six people in a room is much more manageable than 300, right? And work with them. Take a leadership position within that club, become the secretary, become the treasurer, whatever it is, right? But socialize, right? One of the things about college and about the university experience is that socialization factor, right? Where you become, you know, uh, quote unquote fully developed human beings, right? Whatever that means anymore. By, interacting with other human beings and learning about their life's experiences and everything like that. That's how you learn to develop those skills. And if you want to do public speaking, Toastmasters is a great example. Um, Being in a leadership position for a club, great example. Joining any sort of leadership or sort of training type groups at your soon to be job or company, whatever it might be. Force yourself to get out of your comfort zone and take a step in front of people. I was maybe a bit lucky. Maybe this is a good segue into my next slide, that I grew up on a stage performing for people like music and stuff. So it kind of came naturally to me, but it's definitely been a skill that I've refined over many, many years, 30-ish years, I guess, to feel comfortable doing this kind of thing. So what does this mean? Absolutely. Yeah, say the thank you. Thank you. I want to give real quick, again, I don't want to blab for too long, some quick lessons that I think are focused more like the first 5 years out of school, right? Things that looking back to my first 5 years out of school, which really wasn't that long ago, I guess, um, things that might have served me well had I heard them 5 to 7 years ago, right? And one of those, the most important one, is have a reason for what you do, and it's okay if it changes. So how my prior comment maybe segued into that is, my life before becoming an engineer. Why did I become an engineer? I mentioned I was a contractor. I mentioned I was a musician. I did all these things. Why did I choose to become an engineer? Well, actually, it was for the salary, was the original reason. And that's since changed. But it was for the salary. I grew up, my family's all blue collar, lower middle class now. When I was growing up, it was called us poor, right? I didn't really have any money. I didn't have scholarships for going to university. So when I graduated high school, I started at the community college in Charlotte, CPCC, and flunked out after a couple years or a couple semesters rather, because I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't have the money. I was working full time. I wasn't paying attention, right? I didn't have a reason. And for through my early 20s, I again worked as a contractor. I was a musician. I gigged around Charlotte with a few bands and stuff. I had a lot of fun in my 20s, but I always had this goal to get back to school, and I didn't really have a reason for it yet. But then I was talking to a friend. He was taking some computer science classes. He was already making money on the side, and I was like, man, I could do that. I could learn to code. Like, and in my research, I looked up like what bachelor's degree has the highest return on investment or immediate return on investment, and it was computer engineering, $90,000 a year. I was like, man, that sounds like a lot of money. I should become a computer engineer. I didn't become a computer engineer, but that did sort of push me in that direction, right? Was just, hey, my life would be a lot more comfortable if I just got an engineering degree. Well, I ended up getting an electrical engineering degree, not computer engineering, because ones and zeros and I just don't mix for some reason. But the physics made sense to me, so I went forward with the physics side of things, electrical engineering. Um, as I was in my undergrad, my purpose, my reason for being there changed. It wasn't just about making money anymore. I actually kind of enjoyed it. I was kind of good at math. I didn't expect that being a musician. And so I wanted to do something that really, my reason morphed into doing something that really made me happier. It wasn't just about money anymore. Although like having a salary is nice, although government shutdown makes that complicated. But it's more about like using my intelligence and my skills to make myself happy and do something that I find enjoyable and fruitful, right? That's my reason. And the reason I think this is important is that you're going to be faced with a number of decisions in your life, both whether that's what job do I want coming out of school if you have multiple offers, to do I want to take that next step in my career or do I want to change jobs in my career, to do I actually do what my boss is telling me because that might be a line or across a line ethically of what I feel comfortable doing, right? But you have to have a reason to look back to, like this axiomatic, why am I here? So that you know how to answer those very hard questions, right? Um, and this has steered me well. the reason changes, but I always go back to what is my core reason for being here and doing what I'm doing to make those big life decisions, but also even smaller technical decisions sometimes, right? As well as smaller just career moves, right? So something to consider is understand why you're doing what you're doing and have a good reason for it. Um, Experience is experience, use all of it. So I'm not a hiring manager now. If anyone's curious, I cannot hire you. Um, but what I have done in my capacity through the various supervisory and managerial roles I've held is review hundreds of resumes, probably engineering resumes specifically for mechanical, electrical, computer science, most of the fields within engineering, not chemical. I don't work with chemical engineers. Point being, though, every resume has an experience section, quote unquote, experience. What I see a lot of new grads do is they call it work experience or they call it project experience or whatever. It's just experience. Experience is experience. Use all of it. And by all of it, I mean not just your technical experience. I was a contractor. I was a musician. I mentioned that part of my training in life, my experience was being on stage in front of people, right? That's experience. And hey, guess what? I talk in front of people all the time. I'm kind of good at it. And maybe that's partly why I got to where I got in my career as quickly as I did at APL, because I'm that weird engineer who's actually good at talking to people, right? Use it. Use all of the experience that you have at your fingertips from your entire life and shape it towards what you want to make, right? Uh, Public speaking experience is not something you normally put on a resume for an engineer, right? I still had it on my resume as an engineer, and it was actually a talking point in my interview process of like why I even bothered to put that. It's like, well, because it's good experience. I don't think most engineers have that, and it actually kind of stood out. But that's also translated to a number of opportunities, maybe even this one, where you have this opportunity to be in front of people, and if you feel comfortable and in control of the situation while I'm staring at a bunch of black screens right now, but you get the point, like in front of people, that affords you more opportunities as you progress through your career as well, right? So not just for public speaking, but technical experience, life experience, right? Like if you're 90% of engineering is just people, and a lot of us grew up around other people. That is experience, right? How do you use it? And how do you maybe quantify it for your job, right? So that was something I've seen a lot where resumes list work experience. Like it's just experience. Don't specify work experience. Don't specify anything else. Just use the experience you have and try and think about it in the context that you're living in right now. Um, Hard one for me to swallow when I first started out of school. You're not the big idea person yet, right? You're just going to be starting in an entry level position most likely. Or if you're going to grad school or something like this, you're going to be like the new person in the lab, right? And there's that PhD student who's like your senior advisor, whatever the roles are. Um, the point being is, your first few years should just be learning mode. Learning, learning, learning. And if people ask you for a big idea, by all means provide it if you have it. But, don't get spun around the wheel of try to get these big ideas out there and get frustrated when they don't land. It's like you're new, man. Like you're not moving the needle yet, right? Now, and there's a reason for that, right? Because you may have a great technical idea, but you may not understand the associated costs or how long it takes to actually pull off that technical thing that you're proposing, but your manager probably does, right? And or the guy who's been there for 50 years who's, getting ready to retire, he probably fully understands what you're proposing when you may not. And there's this, word or a phrase for that called the Dunning-Kruger effect, where, you learn something about something, so you think you know everything about it, but in reality, you know nothing. And then as you learn more and more about it, you kind of get back to that area where you think you know enough, right? Dunning-Kruger effect is a really, really big thing for new engineers that I've seen, myself included. And it's just a pitfall that I try and advise people against. Like, take your time, be patient, and when you actually have the weight or the wherewithal to push your idea forward, use it, right? Or if there's an opportunity earlier than that, you should, throw it out there. But don't get bent out of shape if those ideas don't move forward just yet, right? Take the time to learn. You will make mistakes. This is probably the most obvious lesson, right? But I played Pokemon growing up. I'm sure something similar exists now. But you gain experience, right? You experience points, and every mistake is just a lesson. I'm sure people have heard that before. My music instructors would disagree. Every mistake was a reason to yell at me. But point being, in the engineering world, mistakes happen. right? And we have classes on this, right, where they talk about how things fail, right? We all seem to forget the name of the bridge that was wobbling and then eventually, collapses. Like I'm sure we've all seen that video. Electrical engineers probably see videos about like transfer stations like blowing up or something, right? Whatever it is, mistakes happen and things fail. We should not, as humans or as designers or as engineers, worry too much about that beyond the immediate impacts. Like if we're risking life or limb, like that's huge, right? We should worry about that. The failure though should just be a lesson. What mistake did I make? What can I learn from that mistake? And how do I move on? Right? People with the shortest memories tend to be the happiest. And if you're, again, wrapped around some axle and worrying about some mistake you made months ago, you're not going to be effective in the real world right now when things are hitting the fan and you need to get things done. So just, try and be a duck, let the water roll off your back, or whatever metaphor you want, right? Um, be a goldfish, I think. Was that Ted Lasso or something? So that's just another kind of obvious lesson. Less obvious, and maybe the one lesson here I'm going to present that's maybe even a bit contentious. Time is a finite resource. Use as much as you can spare when you first start. So there's this thing called work-life balance. My philosophy, personally, is that work-life balance starts after maybe year 5 out of school, and there's a reason for that. You know, on average, people graduating with a bachelor's degree are 21 to 23 years old, right? If they started right after high school, graduating at 18, right? Early 20s is the gist, coming out with a bachelor's degree. You have more energy, more free time, and just more, you know, get after it attitude in your early 20s than you ever will for the rest of your life, most likely. 30 years down the road when you're in your 50s, you will not have the free time that you do now to devote to your career, to devote to moving your job forward, right? Um, you're gonna have kids, you're gonna have a family, whatever it is, more responsibilities. Now you've got a house that you have to keep up with, right? You're just living in an apartment now, most likely. So like the balance of what your work-life balance should look like can change over time. And my personal philosophy is like the first 5 years out of school, if you're not working on your master's or something, hit it as hard as you can, and don't ignore life. Like I had plenty of fun my first 5 years in industry, as I call it. Don't ignore life, but use the extra time that you have and really make a good impression, and or try to get to a point where you can rebalance that work-life balance in your favor earlier in your career, right? Get to that point on the ladder, or whatever metaphor again you want to call it. Move up to that position where you have a little bit more flexibility earlier in your career. Um, and that'll serve you better in the long term because then you can focus on bigger picture problems as well as, refocus on your life when things start actually getting busy. Like if you start meeting people, having kids, whatever it is, right? So just something I've learned. And the last one, and then I'll maybe throw a bonus one in there. Become irreplaceable. What does that mean? This is a lesson I learned early in life, working contract jobs, just on job sites and seeing how managers and site managers worked with their staff, right? The crew, right? Is the guys who'd been there the longest and had these very specialized skills were impossible to fire, right? You can't replace them. You have no one who's going to show up and do this welding that only that guy can do tomorrow. It's going to take you 6 weeks to find a replacement, if you can, at the rate that you're paying him. So if you just pay him an extra $2 an hour, retain him, and he became irreplaceable because of his skills, that's job security. That is the ultimate job security, in my opinion, is becoming irreplaceable. What does that mean in the engineering sense? It depends, right? So in my case, I can speak to that. Earlier on in my time at APL, there was a program I was working on. Sorry, since I differentiated between it before, a project I was working on, I should say, within a program. And I was the controls and autonomy engineer for that. So it was a platform that needed some code on it to make it go, for instance, drive waypoints or whatever it needed to do. Um, so I got really good at that, built out the model, built out a simulated environment, wrote all the code for that, learned all the math and the algorithm stuff that I hadn't really been taught before. I just had to learn it in the field, as it were. And owned the testing and development of all that. And I kind of became irreplaceable on that project, right? I've since trained multiple people, actually helped get someone from UNCC hired into my group specifically to work on this with me, so that I could replace myself as I transition to program management. And still wasn't fully effective. He did a great job, but there's just some things that when you build something, you know that someone who's like looking at the drawings can't really know, right? And so I'm actually advising and helping do some analysis on that old program now. Um, so I just find that interesting. Become irreplaceable, ultimate job security. The hard part is replacing yourself when it comes time to replace yourself because you don't want to be so irreplaceable at a certain level that your management doesn't want to move you to the next level because then they have no one to backfill you at that level you were just at, right? So you also have to have the skill set to be able to train your replacement. Um, and then maybe just a bonus one. And again, apologies, the slides aren't the best, so I don't think I even have oh, I do have a thank you slide. Hey, look at that. Bonus lesson might just be, in all of this, as we're all, I'm sitting here talking about my career and all that, and I'm sure I'm gonna get a bunch of questions about career stuff. As we're focused on career and everything, and our professional lives moving forward, and this is a professional development class, right? Um, One thing that tends to get missed is the life outside of our professional worlds, right? The news happens, the world happens, your personal life moves forward, and all of that is really the reason that we're here, right? Doing what we're doing is for the people that we love and the things we love to do, for our families and friends, right? And for ourselves, of course, to enjoy our own lives. So, don't forget about those things as you go forward. And that's a really good uh, reminder as we move through life about why we're doing what we're doing. And again, having that reason for what we do. All right, so that's all I had prepared. I'll flip back to this slide just for the time being in case there's anything on here that, piques people's interest. But then otherwise, yeah, happy to sit here and chat and take any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Ashton. Okay, let's go ahead and have some questions in the chat, y'all.
All right. So how to gain experience in college in ways other than clubs. I've applied to internships as well, but are there any other ways? So one other way that I chose to go down when I was at UNCC was also working with my professors. You may have to do it for free, right? But if you become like a lab assistant or something with your professor, that's experience, right? And maybe it translates into an internship through some, friend that a professor has, as they happen to have good networks, right? Your professors are great resources, not just because they teach you stuff, because they have networks with industry in your area, most likely. And so start there. If you can't do clubs for whatever reason, your professors probably have some good ideas about how you could be helping out, and gaining some extra experience. I did that a lot. So I worked with Dr. Cox and Dr. Oh, I'm gonna blank on his name. Doesn't matter either way. So I worked with multiple professors as an undergrad. So gained a lot of valuable experience and insights that way.
Great. I know y'all have some other questions for them. So kind of what does your future look like? Can I ask?
Absolutely. Yeah. So because I'm on this sort of hybrid position right now between APL and the Navy, it was a 2-year agreement as of last July. So this coming July, in about 8 months or so, I go back to APL full time. And what that means, I'm not entirely sure. There's a lot of changes happening. Under the new administration, both organizationally within DoD, as well as like within APL. We just got a new director, right? And so there's a lot of seats being moved around and filled and unfilled. And, so maybe I go back and become a full program manager, whatever that means. I'm not sure yet. So my future is a bit open, but I'm always looking for the next cool thing to work on. I've worked on a variety of systems. The summary I give people that I can say in an unclassed space is that I've put things at the bottom of the ocean and I've put things in the stratosphere and everywhere in between. So, 3 kilometers deep and 30,000, no, 30 kilometers high, is what I've done. And so I'm always looking for like that next thing, that's interesting and fun for me. So what that is, I'm not sure yet.
Okay. Do you think you'll stay in kind of the same arena that you're at now? Or do you think like, hey, I'm gonna just totally go to the state of Washington and work on blah? I'm just kind of curious.
I have considered it, and frankly, like, DoD work comes with its own toll. And I have my own sort of boundaries of what I feel comfortable working on. I don't build missiles, right? Um, for a reason. So, but point being is like I've considered, whether it's time for a career change or a field change, but stay in robotics. Other areas in robotics that are really interesting that folks on the call might be interested in would be like medical robotics, for instance, surgery robots and things of that nature, but also smaller things. This is actually an area Johns Hopkins is world renowned for. It's the biomedical engineering field of things that make specific procedures much easier for doctors to perform or less invasive for patients, so it's a quicker healing process. That's a robotics job as well. And if you're doing robotics, like a robotic surgery device, that's definitely a robotics job. Other areas, Seattle area is actually great. Amazon is out there. There's another bunch of big tech companies in the Seattle area. And despite the cost of living, crisis out there, it's actually more affordable than San Francisco, where there's still more robotics work. Um, so Amazon's great. Obviously, they have a bunch of robotics work, and they also have like their Kuiper, however you say it, Kuiper space satellite program. I considered applying to that at one point in my career. Decided against it because my wife didn't want to move to the West Coast. Right? It just is what it is. Uh, let's see. I mean, autonomous driving cars, like that's blowing up. Lots of work there. NVIDIA is starting to do robotics work. That's the largest company in the world, $5 trillion company that's investing probably trillions of dollars into robotics and using their GPUs to drive robotics into the future. And we were all seeing all these videos coming out of China with bipedal robots and stuff. So that's a big field, but industrial robotics is a huge thing as well. I mean, I could go on and on. Honestly, there's so many different fields outside of defense that need robots, and our field is just going to blow up over the next few years as AI gets pushed further and further to the edge. Better compute at the edge and lower power algorithms means more processing at the edge where it's needed, rather than having to have these gigantic server farms scattered around the world. And so, that's definitely an area that's going to touch all industries as it rolls out. So I'm not sure if I'm ready to jump ship and go to something else, or if I want to stay my time here at APL. I mean, they work on a lot of different things. Um, so yeah, I see another question. Would you suggest that PhD graduates market themselves with the standard formatted resume or the CV, which dives deeper into their publications and related work? That entirely depends on the type of job that you're applying to. If you're applying to industry, and not a research role within industry. If you're applying to industry where they need a PhD level engineer, it should be a resume speaking to your experience, what you've actually done, what you developed, right? Because most likely working for industry, you're not going to be doing, traditional academic research where you're publishing on a regular basis. They're going to care more about results, right? Where if you're applying for like a postdoctorate somewhere, right? Or if you're applying to a very, very researchy organization that does publish, right? Which some sectors of APL publish heavily, others don't, because of the type of work we do. Then you probably want more of a CV and talk more to your research areas, right? You should tailor your resume and your application to every job. Strongly recommend that. It's painful and it's time consuming. But they've made the tools a lot easier to use than when I was applying for jobs as far as like how you can rapidly apply to things. And just tailoring your resume or your CV, however you format it, to each job really does make a difference.
So Ashton, just quick question. As students, please continue to write your questions in the chat. A lot of the employers will say, we want students coming out that have experience in AI and robotics, but as you know, it's limited at the undergraduate level. There's only
Absolutely.
so much you can do. Do you really need a master's or higher level degree to do the type of work these employers are seeking? Or what are your thoughts on that?
So limited experience outside of APL, right? I worked at Northrop Grumman Synoptics. That was an industrial plant. And I was doing robotics there, but it was industrial robotics, right? Higher voltage, bigger motors, but same concepts. Um, the new buzzword nowadays is AI ML, right? And it's being pushed out to industry kind of, and there's a lot of hiring managers who are very much liquored up on it. Limited, as Linda said, like limited availability to work on those things in undergrad. So how do you gain experience? Um, there are online courses and things where you can learn those types of things. There are sort of not textbooks, but like books that walk you through a project, teach you how to do everything. You can buy them on Amazon for like $120, and it'll teach you how to build a agentic AI agent in Python, in 180 pages. That kind of stuff on your resume, it's experience, right? It's not work experience, it's not school experience, but it's experience. It's something you did potentially in your free time or for a school project that you hopefully understand what you did and can speak to it and use that, right? Um, to the other question, do you require a master's? I did not have a master's when I started at APL. I got my master's part-time, taking one class a semester, three semesters a year, and did my thesis, in the 3 years, my first 3 years of the lab. It was painful, but I got through it, right? Um, did I need that master's to do the job? No, I was already doing the job. Has the master's made me better at doing that job? Probably, right? Some additional technical depth in certain areas that I never would have learned outside of, self-study or, painful on-the-job training. So again, sadly, the answer for most engineering questions is always it depends. It depends what you want to do and where you want to go in life. I think if you are wanting to jump into doing the type of work that took me a few years to get to, more holistic design for robotic applications, having a master's coming in is probably going to help you because you'll have already been exposed to things like Kalman filters, right? Sensor fusion, uh, path planning algorithms, right? And other types of algorithms. Those kinds of concepts that you don't really get into at the undergrad level, especially at UNCC. It's not for lack of trying at UNCC. They have robotics classes. It's just not really the big field in the area, right? Industry in Charlotte is energy. So it just is what it is. But that's how you can kind of carve out some additional experience at UNCC. So as an example, and I wanted to speak on this, but before I mentioned it, but I didn't speak about it. The rocketry team at UNCC. So senior design project, they compete in the NASA USLI competition every year. It's a massive nationwide competition. 50 to 55 universities compete every year, and UNC Charlotte has won that competition twice. I think they've placed second like 6 times, and placed in the top five a handful of other times, right? I mentor that team, but also was on that team my junior year and my senior year. Wait, what? Ashton's a senior design project. Why were you on it your junior year? Because I have no sense of time management, but also I needed the experience, right? I wanted to build stuff my junior year. I wasn't fine with, at the time was not fine with just taking classes. I would love to just take classes now, but but I wanted to build stuff. So I found a team that was building real things, and I joined that team and gained that experience and leveraged that to get the job at APL. So maybe another anecdote that might be helpful in that same vein of questioning is like, if I didn't have a master's and yet I still got into this field, how did that happen? Sometimes it happens by happenstance. I was told years after I was hired that part of the reason they hired me is because I listed MSP 430 microcontrollers on my resume. And the group I got hired into used that specific microcontroller a lot. And they didn't want to, of the other candidates, I was the only one who listed MSP 430. And they liked me for other reasons. They never asked me about MSP 430s in the interview. They liked me for a lot of other reasons. But part of the reason they hired me was because they didn't have to deal with the learning curve, right?
I
So,
think that's a
so
great point. Are there things that the students maybe don't think should be on a resume, but could potentially showcase like their hobbies or things they're doing on the side, to maybe
so
make them rise to the top?
yeah, and this is always it depends. It depends on who's reviewing the resumes, what they like to see. My advice that I've given for years, right, is I personally don't care for the opening statements about like why you want this job and why it's the best job for you. I know why you want the job. Most of the time it's because you want to get paid. It's the same reason most people want a job, and that's fine. That's a valid reason to have a job. Again, go back to make sure you have a reason, right? Getting paid is a valid reason. But what you should include on your resume is it should be more targeted. There's a lot of hype around like keywords and stuff to get past the AI filters and all that. That's valid, right? Sadly, that's the valid truth of the world. But what I mostly look at when I'm reading a resume is what they've actually done. And what, in this case, for embedded systems, for instance, what hardware have they worked on? What software skills do they have? Projects are great, but if you say I built a widget, but you don't tell me what you specifically did to build that widget and what lesson you learned, that's just wasted space on a resume, right? Because that didn't actually tell me anything other than you built a widget. And so really lean into the skills that you developed during projects if you don't have internship experience, right? Lean into soft skills that you developed if you do have internship experience. If you're working on a team or reporting to a manager or something, there's soft skills involved there, and you should lean into that because that's heavily underrepresented on engineering resumes, and heavily valued in engineering circles, as I mentioned before. Communication and soft skills are 99% of the job. And then, what I've seen work really well for folks in my group is a breadth of experience. So one of the slides I touched on before, I had a note to mention this, and maybe I'll just mention it here, is the question of whether students should specialize in some field, whether through a master's or PhD, or just get really good at something in a job, or if they should become, try a bunch of things and get a breadth of experience. I always recommend early on to specialize. And the reason for that is A, become irreplaceable, get really good at one thing and they can't replace you super easily. But B, specialization affords you, a chance to become a subject matter expert on things and maybe get asked questions from other parts of your organization and get experience and insights from those other parts of that organization, right? If you're working for Siemens, that's a massive multinational corporation, right? If you're really good at one thing and you've specialized in that one thing, they might travel you around to teach other people, right? So I always recommend early on specialize first and then broaden as your job requires. Um, that served me well. I got really good at one thing. Became irreplaceable, right? But then also, have had a number of experiences that were related to what I was good at because I was good at that one thing. And I wish I could get into more specifics. That's a very generic statement, without being able to get into specifics, but sadly I can't. Um, so that's thoughts on resume and hiring and stuff.
That's
Also one
great.
page. It should never be more than one page if you're a brand new, fresh out of college student. I've seen 4-page resumes from people. I'm like, why? You
Oh
don't have
my.
20 years of experience. So one to 2 pages tops, 2 pages tops, because it's now digital and scrolling down one more page isn't a big deal, but flipping a page over if I were to print it is also not a big deal. But if it's more than 2 pages, you're again just kind of wasting people's time. So
I see
life
that
of
a lot, sir. You're
yeah, yeah,
100% correct. They want to put it all on there. They
yeah.
do, and I
It's
don't
all
blame
about
them.
it's all about distillation of the information, right?
Sure.
So
So my last couple questions here is what about LinkedIn, portfolios showcasing what these students have worked on? How much of that do you think is of value?
I think it's great for engineering students if you have a website, if you have a LinkedIn with documents attached showing what you did, great, right? Because and then you put that on your resume. Me reviewing a resume, what I'll do is I'll actually go to that link, right? Probably one of the first things I'll do actually before I even start reading. I'll pull your GitHub, I'll pull your LinkedIn, whatever it is you put on there, and I'll see what you actually did. Because that's direct access to for the folks who code, who write software. That's direct access to how that person thinks, right? And that's more valuable than anything when you're hiring someone. Um, so absolutely valuable. And if it's in a conveniently placed thing like a website, you should put that on your resume for sure.
Thank you. I always let students know that that is really something employers are looking, like you said, to get to know you, but also a great way to showcase your talents.
Oh, for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if students have any other questions, feel free to type them in. My last question to you, sir, is how do you keep up to date on your technical and non-technical skills? Do you go to conferences, webinars, books? What can you do to just help be a continuous student?
And that's actually a great point, as well as like never stop learning, be a continuous student. So another life lesson there, should add to the list, I guess. So how do I do that? It's interesting. So a lot of my job, I would say, is, borderline cutting edge, where there's not literature out there, where we're really breaking ground in some ways. But then a good portion of it is founded or is built on, some fundamental building blocks that are well published on and so on and so forth, right? So I glean information from a lot of sources. I actually find a lot more engineering news just scanning news articles than I do purposely looking for engineering news or engineering specifics. Um, there are obviously journals and stuff. You can what's it called? Register for or whatever, and some employers actually pay for those or subscribe. Will pay for your subscription, so you don't have to pay out of pocket. Those are great. And then Google Scholar, honestly, Google Scholar. If I hear a new word or a new phrase, or like, hey, we want to do what was it? Quantization aware optimization for AI ML. And I was like, I have no idea what those words mean. Google Scholar, plug it in, read the first few articles on it, right? Great way to quickly learn things. Now, Google Scholar is not always free, or at least the articles they link to aren't always free. Certain organizations, again, pay for the subscriptions, but that's how I try and keep up. And then reading news articles as well. I'm always looking at what industry's creating, and industry loves to broadcast any new tech that they put out there. And so there's probably some article somewhere with some new whiz bang thing that I want to see, and I'll find it, and then I'm, in my mind, kind of breaking it down, how they build it, what's the secret sauce, what's their IP, right? Intellectual property, and learn from it that way. Indirect learning versus direct learning, if you will.
No, that's absolutely wonderful. So we're about out of time. We want to respect your time, sir. If we can just thank you, if y'all could put in the chat, that would be great. I'm sure we would want to officially thank Ashton for his time. Let me go ahead and stop the
Absolutely.
recording.